let's call the meeting to order at 7:03. The vice chair and Santos has agreed to take minutes, so if you see her typing furiously away, that would be the reason for it. So welcome everyone, and for those of you who are joining us online, much appreciated that you're spending some time with us as we're going over something of significance for our town. And it may not be necessarily the most exciting topic of what we want to discuss on a Thursday evening, recodification of zoning, but it is something that is really important for the entirety of the town itself. And the recodification itself requires priorities, and that's really the reason why so we can request the input from people and also have an explanation of what has been done as a draft. So we're going to go over some items, and Attorney Bobrowski will take us through what has been posted in the draft itself. It is just that as a draft. Nothing here has been finalized by any means. Nothing here is ready in its current form to go to town meeting for potential approval. And then from there, if town meeting approves, it goes to the Attorney General to get reviewed again, and provided it passes that hurdle as well, it then becomes the bylaws inactive for the town. But we need to get input from people. If you're able to give it tonight, fantastic. If you aren't able to give it tonight, or you realize there's something afterwards, please contact the committee. You can use the email address, bylawreview@wakefield.ma.us, and bylaw review committee at wakefield.ma.us, or you can contact us through any of the other means. We're readily available. We love to have input. We love to hear from our neighbors. It's really important that we actually hear from everyone, so that we know what the priorities should be for the town itself. That's why we're doing this project. The bylaws haven't been updated as a full set in many, many, many years. And so the idea here is that we're recodifying, renumbering, updating, making things compliant with state law, that in some cases just the laws of the Commonwealth have changed and bylaws haven't. So we're trying to make things updated. The intent of this is not to take things that have not yet been major concepts that have not yet been approved by town meeting. The reason why I'm mentioning that, there are two major concepts that have not yet been approved at town meeting that are not incorporated into this. That would be the MBTA communities, and that would be campus. So those two major concepts and all the construction around those are not up for whether they should be a part of the recodification, because there's nothing to codify because they don't currently exist. So there are other changes and so forth. Attorney Bobrowski will take that through it. So the way that I'd like to do the feedback here is for people in the room, as Attorney Bobrowski does his presentation. If you have feedback, if you could raise your hand or otherwise indicate that.
There's no way to raise your hand.
And for those online, you can also raise your hand, and you can use the raise hand feature, and I will keep the participants list
There is
open.
no raise hand feature.
Hi, it's Theo. In the reactions button, if you click on that, you'll see a raise the hand icon.
Thank you.
And if we could suggest that for everyone to mute themselves until you have a question, that would be great, so we don't pick up background noise. Thank you.
And if necessary, I do have master control where I can mute people if needed, but I'd rather not do that. For those, again, who are joining online, if you can use the raise hand feature, I will get to you. We can see, if you turn your cameras on, who is speaking as well in the room. That becomes very helpful for those of us in the room. So if you have something to speak, if you're willing to,
I can't.
appreciate it. So, any questions about the process itself before we get started? Not seeing any hands raised. So with that, Attorney Bobrowski, welcome. Glad to have you here. And I will turn the floor over to you to go over things as you want them shared. Anything that you want shared, I have the ability to share. These are the documents that you set the most recent version.
Great.
So we can share those to, especially to the people online.
Can we put this up?
I can put the list of changes up if you would.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Bobrowski. My office is in Concord, Massachusetts. And I'm pleased to be here for the first stakeholders meeting of the recodification.
I can barely hear this guy.
If you can speak up a little bit, the microphone.
Please.
And please mute.
Well, I haven't had my voice since COVID, so I think I have long COVID of the voice, whatever that is. So this is probably about the 110th community, plus or minus, that I've recodified over the course of my 38 years being a land use lawyer. I've worked in cities as big as Worcester, Lowell, Salem, Fitchburg, New Bedford, and I've worked in towns as small as Alfred and Mount Washington. And Mount Washington is actually the second smallest town in Massachusetts. What's the smallest?
That's ridiculous.
The Gosnell, exactly. So you learn something every time you go to a different place, and some of that rides on my back as I go in different places like Wakefield. So the process here has been to, first of all, have me do a diagnostic of the zoning. I tear it apart. I find things that are good. I find things that I think could need fixing. My focus is always on changes in statute, changes in case law. Those are the two things that drive a recodification. I'm also looking for internal inconsistencies, waste of time, things that might have been good 30 years ago, but really don't carry much weight today. And the second part of that process is to focus on 4 themes as we put the first draft together. So I look specifically at the job descriptions of people in town: building commissioner, Board of Appeals, planning board, site plan review, special permit, all of those things, see whether the process is operating correctly. Secondly, I look at your use table and the definitions, and I try to make everything in the use table a defined term so that the building commissioner isn't trying to guess what constitutes a restaurant or a warehouse. And there is some guesswork in that if it's undefined. Third, we look at residential pieces of the bylaw, everything from home occupations to affordable housing. And then fourth, we look at the non-residential pieces, mostly focusing on things like performance standards. That would be noise, anti-noise regulations, lighting standards, landscaping standards, traffic standards, things that commercial activities bring to a town like Wakefield. At the end of that process, I put the first draft together. Usually it doesn't have things that are merely being renumbered because I'm trying to get to the good stuff. And we have a meeting and we talk it through. We've already done that. I then put a second draft together and it's all in. This is the second draft clean. It's 133 pages. There are a few sections in here that still have strikeouts in them, but I left them in there on purpose so we could focus on them when we got there. And tonight is part 3 of the public meetings after the drafts are taking shape. And this is, give us your input now. People tonight here that don't serve on the committee, heard a lot from the committee. Committee needs to hear from you. That'll shape our third draft as we go forward in the next few weeks. The goal is to put this in front of the voters at the spring town meeting next year. So there'll be a lot more opportunities for you to weigh in on the draft and whether you like it or not, or have alternative suggestions. And I find this to be a very useful process because at the end of the day, if you're vested in this because you were a participant, you're more likely to vote for it. So that's the goal. So with that in mind, I want to ask Dan if he'll put up the flow chart.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that those of you who have, how many of you have actually looked at the bylaw, read the bylaw? Right. So it's one of the miracles of recodification is that there are actually people who have read the whole bylaw. I mean, think about that a month and a half ago. Very few people have actually taken the time to study the zoning in their city or town. I'm going to walk you through this section by section. It might be kind of difficult. Can you put the bylaw up?
I can.
And my objective in walking you through it section by section is to tell you what's new, what's the same, and why it changed, and whether it makes a whole lot of difference, major or minor change. And at the end of the section, I'll pause. If there are any questions about the section, we'll answer them, go on to the next section at that point. So section 1 is 2 pages out of 133. It's the handshake of the bylaw. It tells you basically what the purpose is, what the authority is for it, chapter 48, which is the zoning act, and the home rule amendment, which is article 89 to the Constitution. It also tells you what the zoning bylaw means in context. What about the other bylaws that are out there, like general bylaws or wetland bylaws, things of that sort. For the most part, what it boils down to is that if zoning controls it, zoning trumps. If it's governed by 2 things and zoning is the more stringent regulation, zoning trumps. And that's pretty consistent. It's set in your existing bylaw. We just repeated it here in this bylaw. The only other aspect of this that requires a little bit of explanation is the amendment procedure. You have a unique amendment procedure for zoning. Chapter 48, section 5 governs town meeting action, public hearings before that. And you've taken the time to put in some fees for the Board of Appeals on specific types of zoning changes, advertising costs, things of that nature. But those are things that are in your bylaw today. And you also have a list of fees that I was urged to keep in because apparently if they're in the bylaw, they're at least advertised to people as what they're going to have to pay. I find it difficult to include them because to change this, you're not going to have to get a 2/3 vote of town meeting. If there were regulations in the background, you would be able to do it just on an agenda item at a regular meeting. But the process here invited me to put them in the bylaw. I didn't change them. They're exactly what you have today. That's the essence of section 1. It's just a way to get the wheels rolling. Any questions on section 1?
If anyone online has any questions, you're welcome to unmute or raise your hand. Seeing none, go ahead.
Section 2 is the recitation of your districts. And again, this is a recodification. I'm not walking the street trying to find the boundary line between the residence district and the business district and looking to see if it's a business or a residence, trying to move it 15 feet. That there is a process in which that's an important aspect of the work, but that's not what this is about. This is about bringing the bylaw up to speed. And that's a planning effort, moving the lines around that was not something that we contracted to do. So there are a couple of changes notwithstanding that, and they're mostly outmoded districts. So there's an assisted living facility district, overlay district, and we've at least recommended that that be deleted. Not that we don't like assisted living, we're going to propose a senior living facility bylaw, broader than assisted living. It would include independent living, assisted living, long-term care facilities, memory units, congregate care. So instead of just focusing on one aspect of senior care, it brings all aspects of senior care to the fore. The other one that's being deleted is the attached residence overlay district. And I'm told that it's not been used. So there's no point in continuing that. There's a list of overlay districts in section 2.2.1. And the only one that really isn't discussed here is the one you passed at your last town meeting. And that's the self-storage overlay district. We're waiting for the Attorney General to take action. When she does, we'll put that in. She has 90 days from receipt of the materials from your clerk to certify that the bylaw meets standards. I'm sure it will, but until that comes around and the amount of time we have before the Springtown meeting, we'll get it into the 3rd draft. I think the only other new things here with regard to this would be, is the split lots new?
Which one?
Split lots, 2.5.
There's just modification of the language on that.
All we did was change it. I am impressed with some of the overlay districts that you have, and I'm really hoping that the use of them can be expanded. The Creative Development Overlay District is consistent with an idea that I've used in a number of cities and towns where if somebody has a really good idea, but it isn't in the book, they bring it to town, talk to the planning department, talk to the manager, and they hope that they can work with the town to bring that idea to the voters, more or less a referendum on the project that they have in mind. That's worked very well along Route 128. I can point you to the places. Hartwell Avenue in Lexington, on the right-hand side of the highway, Burlington, everywhere. There's also Medford now is trying it. I rezoned Medford a year and a half ago or so. They've got 3 already. Haverhill, I rezoned in 19. They've got 5 already. So this is an idea that helps the private sector get their idea in front of town meeting. If they want to do something and it isn't in the use table, most of them just stall out at that. But knowing that they can bring that unique idea to an office in town and start the process, congratulations, you had that in your bylaw already. So we'll see if we can broaden that, make it more attractive for people. That's pretty much it for the districts. Any questions?
We do have a question online, in person and online.
Yes.
So I was sitting on one of your calls, gosh, I can't keep track. It's kind of been on and off sometimes. But we did talk about you guys did talk about the assisted living overlay district in the past. And I know there were some concerns on one of the calls about where the assisted living overlay district would live now and how that went through town meeting and got voted on. How does that now play? I know you said that will be covered under this new district that you're proposing.
It's not a new district, it's a thing, a senior housing facility, not a
And then
district.
it'll just be in the table of uses where it's an allowable use. Okay, okay,
So as far as the old facility is concerned, I'm sure it took a special permit in the first place.
yeah.
And because it will become non-conforming when the new bylaw eliminates that district and refers new clients to the senior living facility bylaw, it will need a special permit as a non-conforming use or structure. Special permit here, special permit there, it's all pretty much gonna wash out in terms of the impact on the existing facility.
Okay.
And we've gone back and forth on that idea. I'm not saying it's locked in stone here, but that's, I think, what I'm recommending, and if there's pushback, we'll fix it accordingly.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm sorry. I just remember it being brought up in one call, so I was just wanted to bring it up
It comes
again.
up pretty much at every meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Excellent. And Theo,
Yeah, hi, sorry, I'm clicking quickly. I guess that was pretty much my question. Do we have to have like an affirmative vote to remove the assisted living overlay? Or, I mean, it's just part of the overall approval of the codification. Like, is there, I mean,
You know, the way, well, certainly not this evening, if that was your question.
no, but I was more as overall process.
My recommendation usually is to do this all in one fell swoop. So the bylaw, the warrant article that evening will say, delete the old and substitute the new. And the actual warrant article will take the principal headings of your old bylaw, purpose, districts, uses, dimensional requirements, and say, delete Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4. And then on the other side of that will be a column of the new chapters that I'm recommending, and they'll line up in the same way. So it's not a repetition of the whole thing. The Attorney General's been very friendly to that notion now. I've done that for 20 years, and it makes it a lot easier to advertise in the paper. But obviously, people are going to get a copy of this. It'll either be handed out at the town meeting or you'll see it online. I should tell you that online, if you're interested, is a coded copy of the changes in the bylaw. Tonight I'm working off of a clean copy, and it doesn't have any coloration to it. But there is a version online in which everything yellow is new, everything strikeout is strikeout, and everything black is existing text. I don't do it in track change because you can well imagine that if I move the wireless from here to there, I got 17 pages of deletion, only to have it reappear in a red somewhere else. So I hand code it, and I delete the code by hand as well. I also would point out that as you're going through the bylaw, you may see some references to old sections. Those are just left in there for my cross-referencing purposes, and I usually pick up the cross-references by the third draft.
Thank you.
thank you. Anyone else in person or online?
Now we've made it through 4 pages. The first rule of recodification is that the first 19 pages are very well looked at. After that, all bets are off. So the use table is a part of section 3. And let me go through section 3, and then we'll double back and we'll talk about the actual use table. So what I've tried to do here is create a section that covers principal uses and also addresses accessory uses. The use table will identify with the simplest mechanism possible in the key, whether it's allowed, why, yes, or prohibited, and no, or it's permitted only by special permit. And then the identity of the special permit granting authority is abbreviated. So if it's planning board, it's PB. If it's Board of Appeals, it's BA. If it's town council, it'll be TC. And those are the three eligible special permit granting authorities. It's not forum shopping. You can't go to the town council when it says PB. You have to go to the designated special permit granting authority. And it differs from situation to situation. Most of them, I would say the vast majority of them are either B, well, certainly the vast majority are either BA or PB. And the idea here is that you've got one-stop shop. Somebody wants to run a business in town, they can look. I ran into somebody the other day that wanted to open up a body art establishment in Maynard, where I wrote the zoning maybe 5 years ago. I just happened to be at the counter talking to the town planner. We took up the use table. Within 30 seconds, we could identify body art establishment, two districts, industrial and business. We pointed them out on the map. Off they went to look at possible locations. That's the idea behind this. And it's very user-friendly. Principal uses follow a basic rule. They are not mentioned, they are not allowed. So there's no guesswork here. That's the standard interpretation of the zoning bylaw. Uses not expressly permitted are prohibited. And I haven't listed every prohibited use. That would be no's across the columns of districts. Many of them are prohibited that are not mentioned, but that's the standard in statutory interpretation, as it's called. There's also a different way of looking at accessory uses. Accessory uses are a broader category. You can't possibly guess every accessory use. It just has to be incidental and subordinate and customary. It has to be usually on the same lot as the principal use. But within the realm of that, there are thousands of accessory uses, not thousands, but hundreds. And to list them all would be an exercise in futility. The land court has recently said that as long as you say the use has to meet the definition of accessory, customary and subordinate, incidental, then it's also allowed, even though it's not listed. So just for a recent example, I had a case up the road in Boxford where a gentleman, believe it or not, was making 1/8 scale model locomotives in his garage. This was his hobby. He got the blueprints. These are famous locomotives that went on Pacific lines. And he actually built one with his dad and was now in the middle of the second. The neighbors thought he was a machine shop. He made every part himself. They saw the trucks coming in with FedEx packet deliveries. He wasn't bothering anybody, but the neighbors were suspect nonetheless. So they called the building inspector and he said, "This is my hobby." The building inspector said, "An odd hobby it is." Well, what's the difference between that and Alexander Calder making metal statues in his garage, if that's what he wanted to do, and selling them to a fabulous museum in New York City? So the idea that I would list hobbies like locomotive assembly in the schedule of accessory uses is absurd. I think the land court hit the nail on the head, and that's the approach I've taken since they've done. And it, I think, gives a range of flexibility. Other than that, I think your existing bylaw lists some residential uses like private swimming pools, temporary yard, lawn, or garage sales, garage for parking non-commercial vehicles, storage sheds. Those are what you have in your existing bylaw. They make the transition into the new one. You also allow multifamily accessory uses, and there's some listed there, including swimming pools, and recreational facilities, agricultural accessory, retail, particularly seasonal sales of home produce. All of this is stuff that just got moved over and renumbered. Accessory drive-up service is still in and still regulated in the same way. Outdoor storage and display, parking and loading, and industrial retail finally, which is in the existing bylaw, is continued in the draft. The one thing that's a major change here with regard to accessory uses, I think, would be the home occupation suggestion that I've given the committee to look at. A long time ago, I think it was in Chelmsford, there were complaints that the usual standard will not exceed normal traffic associated with, or will minimize parking impacts on the neighborhood. Chelmsford said, the heck with that, that's too subjective, let's objectify this. And their idea was pretty simple. If you have a client, a customer, a pupil, or a non-resident employee coming to the home occupation, you need a special permit. You need a special permit. If you're just working with your family in the home occupation, and it otherwise is customary and incidental, you just go ahead and do it. You probably want a DBA certificate from the clerk's office if you're going to claim the room or rooms for tax deduction purposes. But other than that, you don't have to visit town hall. So it's a pretty bright line. Clients, customers, pupils, non-resident employees. If you're going to have non-resident employees, then you need a special permit. I think the maximum we put in here is 2. So that's everybody in the house plus 2 people driving. And the idea is that the driving is an impact on the existing neighborhood. It changes the dynamic. People's kids are playing in the street on the cul-de-sac. Somebody's got a home occupation that invites people to come to the neighborhood. You can already see the impact of the huge volume of deliveries from the last mile warehouses that are flooding the neighborhoods all day, every day. But this is more of a money-making prospect for the person in the neighborhood, not coming from Amazon. And the idea is just, let's take a look at it pretty closely. Maybe it's a great idea still, but we want to be able to control that a little bit more than the person who's just telecommuting from home. That is indeed the major change in the use section. And then there's a rule on accessory parking in the residence districts. I didn't change any of that. It has mostly to do with unregistered vehicles and commercial vehicles in the residence districts. We did not change that. It's the same as it was. If you could put the use table up, Dan.
So just so I understand the home occupation, so by right, if it's just you working there, doing your thing, that's fine.
Yep.
If you're, say, a therapist and a client comes in, then you would need that special permit.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know, if you're a lawyer, which I am, and you have a will drafted for Mr. Smith, and he can't quite get to your office in the daytime, but he could drop by the house and pick it up at night, I don't see that as necessitating a special permit, but I would defer to the building commission. That's not a regular flow of traffic. That's incidental traffic associated with a courtesy for the most part. But I'll leave that to the building commission. So just going to give you a quick run through the use table, and I have reorganized it so that it's easier to figure out where it is. So anything residential is in subsection A. Most of these are things that you already have. The only changes here that jump out at me are number 12, senior housing facility. And for the most part, those special permits in the last 5 districts are the same rules that you had for the assisted living facility. Institutional uses is always fun. That's subsection B, top of the page. And I always clean it up so that the Dover Amendment uses, the Dover Amendment protects churches, schools, and childcare facilities, is highlighted as yes across the board. This is a measure of state law. Back in 1948, I think it was, Dover prohibited churches in its residence districts. There was a bill passed by the legislature called the Dover Amendment that said Dover has to allow churches anywhere that they want to go. And then that was later amended in the mid-1950s. A lot of pressure in Cambridge between Radcliffe and Harvard cases moved that along to the legislature, and nonprofit, governmental, and religiously based schools were added to the Dover Amendment. And then finally, in the late 1970s, childcare and school-age childcare programs were added. The legislature preambled it by saying, there's a serious shortage. We don't want anybody saying no. We want to let these things go where they need. And those are the 3 things that are core Dover Amendment uses. The language is the same in section 3 for all 3. Can't prohibit it. You can't put it on a special permit, but you can subject it to reasonable conditions having to do with bulk conditions, parking, loading, things of that sort. There's a current movement afoot in the courts to push solar into this category as well. There's already been a land court judge, the chief judge, who said that the exemption for solar is the same as churches, schools, and childcare facilities. We don't know for sure because the language in the legislature put in the bylaw, in the statute is different. They could have used the same language, but for some reason they were intent upon using slightly different language. But to the chief judge of the land court, it didn't matter. It's something that he thinks is going to happen eventually. There's no clear guidance from the appellate courts yet, so we haven't moved it up into B4, if you will.
So rehab and halfway houses, that's in that same spot?
Generally, rehab and halfway houses have to have a non-profit educational component to climb into this. So if there's counseling, that's education, if it's offered by a nonprofit. And the range of programs, not just having to do with rehab, but having to do with counseling for battered women, for people that are with special needs, trying to get job skills. There must be, when I started writing my book, I had maybe 3 footnotes in a string site. This includes 1, 2, 3. Now that string site is probably 18 to 20 things. My favorite is educational use is a Bible camp in Sterling, where the kids study the Bible until lunchtime and then play capture the flag all the rest of the day. That's, the court said that that's an educationally exempt use. So that's, again, it's driven by a test. Is this something which is primarily educational in nature? And that was enough for, I think that's a land court case. Those things are all brought back to statutory language because there's a wealth of case law. And I don't, what's it, you know, if you use shorthand like church or temple or something like that, you're off kilter. It's primarily a religious purpose. Go ahead.
Is Dover Amendment in the list of definitions? I did not find it some time ago.
No, it's in section 3 of the statute. I mean, I could put it into the statute so everybody, into the bylaw so everybody knows where to look.
Yeah, I think, and if you put in the way the definition, the section where it's used, that might be an aid to the casual glancer at the bylaw.
I'll just
Thank
put
you.
for definition, see section 11.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the section 3 of chapter 48 goes well beyond the paragraph in which the Dover Amendment identifies churches, schools, childcare facilities is in its own paragraph. And I think it's paragraph 9. And then there are also things like public service corporations, no discrimination against disabled persons. It's a long list. So the legislature, we operate under a principle here called home rule, which means you can do anything with your zoning bylaw that isn't inconsistent with or preempted by state law or constitution. And you'd say to yourself, well, just how many times have they interfered with that and adopted something that we now have to watch out for? The answer is not 3. It's more like 100. You can't regulate local propane storage facilities with zoning, and the list goes on from there. So those are the inconsistencies that you have to avoid. And otherwise, you can do anything you want. That's a balance, I suppose, in one way. We then have gone to agriculture and other extensive outdoor uses. And then retail service uses in places of assembly. We're trying to narrow that down so that it's not just a helter-skelter list, but as it is, there's still 17 things in this subcategory D. Restaurant uses go 1 through 5, and it breaks down between sidewalk cafe, fast food, restaurant with a drive-through facility. I always recommend that any drive-through facility have a special permit because they're potentially a bad impact otherwise. Automobile-related uses calls out a special category, all the way from light service stations, which usually have food service out a window these days, and a convenience store. Repair services, public parking garage, car wash, industrial uses all the way from light manufacturing down to lumber yards. And then some accessory uses are listed in subsection I. Call your attention, if you're looking at that, to the family daycare home, large or small. That is an accessory use that people run out of their residence. I'm sure there are many in town. And they are, a large one is 10 kids, including resident participants. A small one is 6 kids, including resident participants, and contrast that to a child care center, which I represent several companies that perform the service. Child care center typically wants to shoot for somewhere between 120 and 180 kids. That's the, you can't say no to a child care center, but you can control a family daycare center. The default position I have usually is a family daycare center is as small as a yes. If it's a large, it's gonna be next door to your house. And not every child care center, many child care centers occupy commercial locations. That might even be in the business that they serve and as a service to their employees. So those are key features of the Section 3 discussion, both in the use table and in the text of the bylaw. I'll take questions on Section 3.
Any questions in the room or online? Online, you can raise your hand if you know how to do so, or you can take yourself off mute.
I had a question really actually on the childcare that you finished up with, like, so you can't deny them if traffic becomes an issue? When
No.
people come and go and
No, you
like a public safety, no?
I mean, I haven't seen it yet. I represented the town of Framingham when it was a town in a fight that they had with a methadone clinic on Howard Street. And they claimed that they were exempt educationally because from 9 to 5, after the doses in the morning were administered from 7 to 9, 200, they probably provided counseling service to something like 20, 30 people. And I said to the judge, that's the tail wagging the dog. This is not an educational facility, it's a clinic. And clinics don't have a Dover exemption. And he looked at me like I was the most politically incorrect creature on earth. And I put my tail between my legs and ran when they threatened me with lawsuits under the federal disability laws. And it's there today as far as I know. And you know, it operated fine, but they had 16 parking spaces off street and many on street, 7 to 9, that's not a real big issue. But to use that parking lot for the doses, I did the math once. I think you have to rotate the parking spaces once every 3.5 minutes in order to make the whole thing click. And the judge basically said, let it rip.
I have a question. So I'm sorry, I work economic development, have been doing planning work here for the town. So thank you so much. One use that I've gotten many calls for, and I'm trying to figure out where it fits and it depends too, is breweries. Breweries?
Yes.
On-site breweries. So I could see how if they're manufacturing the brewings, that would be under light manufacturing, correct?
You could fit that under there. I could expand the definition to do it, or I could just put breweries.
Yeah.
And many towns also have opened the door to distilleries.
Yeah, that's a conversation that's been going on. Also, I think about like if you have a restaurant and there's a brewery component to it as well.
Yes. I mean, where I live in Concord and our neighbors, Maynard and Hudson, both have, I know Hudson has 4 or 5 breweries at this point. I think Maynard has one in the clock tower and probably a couple of others as well.
Yeah,
A nice addition to the streetscape. People are having a good time. That's a great way to modernize the bylaw and bring it into play.
yeah.
If you had a farm, you'd be able to rely on a farm license for the brewery.
Yeah.
But I don't expect to find that here.
Something to consider. It's just something I've gotten many calls about, both for a brewery within a restaurant, but then also light manufacturing for a brewery as well too, if they're just gonna be there, looking for space like that.
Duly noted.
Thank you. And I'm just speaking for myself from what I've heard. I don't, I don't know if everyone else feels the same.
No, I think that kind of thing comes up all the time.
Yeah.
Other questions in the room? Questions from the online audience? Not seeing any hands raised. Again, you can raise your hand if you can. I can see that, or if you can take yourself off of mute. Not seeing any, you're welcome to move on.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, wait, one more thing.
Sorry, I'm gonna be that person in this meeting. Microblading. Is that something you've heard of with uses? Microblading, is that, no? That's a big call we've gotten to. It falls under the Board of Health as well, but I think that's been a struggle between the building department, health. That's what it falls under.
What is it?
basically like a temporary tattoo too, right? It's getting very popular, for like eyebrows.
Tattooing an eyebrow.
I know, it's a weird thing.
A woman's
But it's-
eyebrow or man's eyebrow is very light, you get a light tattoo.
I think you might
Yeah.
simply be able to expand the definition of body art establishment
Okay.
by adding microblading. And the thinking behind body art is a unique regulatory object in that it's First Amendment protected. We didn't have tattoo parlors here until, what was it, 20, 35 years ago? They were illegal in Massachusetts. There was a case called Lamphir, I think it was versus one of the towns up on the New Hampshire border. People had to go to Hampton Beach to get a tattoo, or Pawtucket to get a tattoo. And ultimately decided that it was a violation of the First Amendment, not only for the person getting the tattoo, speaking through the art, but the artist, him or herself, creating the art on the body. That's all been extended to include piercing, which is usually a part of a body art establishment. And I see no reason why it couldn't expand further to include microblading. We'll consider,
I'm here. Thank you.
we'll consider
We
adding.
struggled with that one. I didn't know. That's something.
Great feedback that it's the feedback from people, which is how ultimately this process improves.
I'm too old to imagine microblading.
It's a thing, very
I'm
popular.
gonna run into. Although my daughter has spent a good portion of my college tuition money on several tattoos. Okay, so section 4 on general regulations hasn't changed much at all. There is a dimensional table. I should mention that one other district has been deleted from both the use and the dimensional table, and that's the MR district. MR1 and MR2 are no longer in those tables because I'm told that there isn't anything zoned MR1 or 2 in town today. So those things will come out. Other than that, you rely on this wonderful coefficient of regularity. It sounds like a commercial, but this is the way you figure out whether a lot has a valid shape or not. You run it through a formula. If it's working, I'm not going to ask you to change it. So other than that, it's yard and setback regulations. Again, special regulations on traffic visibility, corner clearance, so that people don't block corner visibility with fences or plantings. Dimensional variations by special permit. This needs probably a little bit of discussion. 432. There's a provision in your old bylaw that says that a bank, but only a bank, and only in the business district, can ask for a different set of dimensional performance standards by special permit. So they could be closer in the setbacks, they could perhaps be taller, they could have more coverage of the lot. And when I read it the first time, I was saying, why just banks? Why not other types of commercial buildings that are allowed in the business district? So I kind of made a note to myself there to bring it up. And my suggestion would be that you say commercial buildings and then indicate in the bylaw that the following buildings would be deemed commercial buildings in the use table by referencing the use table. Much like I did B1, B2, B3 for the Dover Amendment. And then people would have more options in the business district, but just an idea. Do you know if any bank has ever taken advantage of it?
Yes, they did it a few years ago, the savings bank, they wanted to move further back from Main Street, taking over and build a business that was no longer in existence, taking that building down, moving the bank over.
Does this date to that?
So I believe so. The purpose, the bank wanted this done, so they just said bank, so they wouldn't have to fight about all this other stuff. Because the other stuff was not in contention.
Yeah, I get it. And so if we don't want to have contention, leave it the way it is, but I thought I would flag it. It's just for discussion purposes.
I think it makes sense to include it as commercial. Because the bank, as much as I love the Wakefield Savings Bank, it other businesses might have a valid reason to do that.
Yeah, because if it was valid for a bank once upon a time, it'll be just as valid for a drugstore.
Since the banks are in the business district, they're not really set back from the street anyways. Aren't they right on the, isn't the setback on a business like zero?
The setback in the business district would be front none,
So, yeah, so you didn't even.
yeah, side and rear, there's a footnote. A minimum of 15 feet adjacent to a
Yeah,
residence.
maybe you can use it on the side. You really don't need it on the front anyways.
Anyone from the online audience that wishes to participate in this component or thoughts on the dimensional variations by special permit? We do have Mr. McGrail, if you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, I just want to point out that bylaw, I was involved, I represented the bank, and that bylaw, mark hit on the head because you have some setbacks from residential districts if you're on a line, zoning line, and it also, especially in the business district, often you have issues with FAR, so it allows relief for FAR, floor area ratio, in building coverage, in open area. So there's a lot of things that sometimes in the business district, commercial buildings struggle with, especially downtown to meet. And this was designed to not have to go for a variance for those items, to be able to do it by special permit. And I think it is a good tool.
Well, I agree with Counselor that the variance oftentimes is a really clumsy tool. And before 1976, when the most recent legislative recodification of the statute took place, think about that, we haven't changed the statute in any significant way in 50 years. And the prior recodification was 1954. In the 1954 version of the statute, it said that a variance could be had in peculiar circumstances, not affecting the district generally. Unfortunately, the Blue Ribbon Committee that was rewriting it looked at work done by Professor Haar at Harvard University studying Cambridge zoning practices. And you won't be surprised to learn that of the instances that he looked at, I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm pretty close, 52 of 59 use variances were granted, and slightly more of the dimensional variances were granted using the test, the famous test. Do we know the guy? Do we like the guy? And are the neighbors complaining? And the legislature overreacted and said that a variance now can only be issued if it's due to soil conditions, shape, and topography. So peculiar circumstances, which was very broad, became very narrow. And that's kind of where we got in trouble. I think we ought to go back. I mean, for example, suppose I live on this side of Main Street and this entire other side of Main Street is gone commercial. And it was residents before, and my district is residents. And you know, it's not a pleasant place to live anymore with the amount of traffic and noise and lights. Why can't I say that it's unique in the district because it's on the street across from the commercial district? Those are old cases. We can't use that anymore. So I think I would broaden this up. Variance is kind of lost meaning. You know, 90% of dimensional variance applicants don't comply, and none on the use side comply. Because you need a grocery store, because you can't build a house due to soil conditions, shape, and topography of the lot. It isn't going to work. So that's where we are. We dug a hole for ourselves. That'll come up again when we talk about use variances, and that's something that we need to clear up. But before we do, I'm going to go to section 5, which is a total rewrite of the non-conforming.
Before we jump to section 5, anyone else online or in the room want to discuss this issue on the dimensional variations? I believe we have one person. Mr. Noel.
Yeah, the volume cut out when you were talking about the two districts that you deleted, the MR and the other one?
I think it's MR1 and MR2.
MR1 and 2, okay. Just making my notes, thank you.
Right, I think this is the most important section for the average person in town, the nonconformity section, because so many of you live in homes that zoning have made nonconforming. Some homes are non-conforming because the lot on which they're located was one thing when the house was built, but the lot requirements don't go down generally, they go up. So if it was a quarter acre and now it's a half acre, your house is non-conforming. The lot's not non-conforming, your house is non-conforming. If the frontage is deficient because it was 75 when you built it and it's 100 today, your house is non-conforming, not the lot. If your house is in one side yard and you have room in the other side yard to put on an expansion, you're gonna have to deal with the laws of non-conformity. There's three categories of non-conformity: non-conforming uses, non-conforming structures, and a special category for non-conforming single and two-family houses. They're carved out for more lenient treatment in the statute. So if I've got a widget factory in it's a non-conforming use, I have created a situation here by which finding, not special permit, and that's the custom that you had before. Finding is a simple majority vote, 3-2, whereas a special permit is a supermajority vote, 4-1. You can ask for a finding to change or substantially extend the non-conforming use. There's a whole 60 cases that tell you when it's a change or a substantial extension. I've charted them all in my book, and it's a fascinating line of cases that goes back to Nectow versus Cambridge in 1928. So there's plenty of fodder there for comparison. I've also put in a suggestion, at least, that you can change one non-conforming use to another, less detrimental non-conforming use, bypassing the variance procedure in a case where it's pretty apparent to everybody that you're going to have to live with that non-conforming use, bad non-conforming use, unless you provide an alternative form of relief. Give you an example. My client I wrote the zoning in Norwood, and many years later, a client came to me and said, I want to change my existing building with 6 apartments and 6 storage units next to the hospital to 12 market rate apartments and for sale. The bylaw didn't allow it. But do you want to live with a building built in 1890? It can't be rewired, it's falling apart, and that's a known haven for all kinds of wonderful activities, or knock it down and put up a new building that doesn't conform, but is much better in terms of the use than the old building. They did, and it's there today if you want to go see it. So it's not right in every situation. You have to be careful that somebody doesn't sweet talk you into thinking that the new thing will be better than the old thing. It has to be plain as the nose on your face in order to use this mechanism. But if you want an alternative to a variance, he wasn't going to get a variance. What were his soil conditions, shape, or topographical features that warranted demo and rebuild for something that he thought he could economically manage? Didn't work that way. So that's uses. Structures, there's 2 things in the statute on structures that all require a finding. One of them is that you're going to alter, enlarge, reconstruct the non-conforming structure, even if you're putting on an addition to a widget factory and it complies. If the widget factory is non-conforming today, it needs a special permit. And the second category, again from the statute directly, if you're changing the use of the non-conforming structure to a different use, you need a special permit. And there's only like 1 reported case. With regard to houses, I've tried to make it as simple for the board and for the applicant as possible. So here's the 3 carve-outs. You can change your house if it's non-conforming, single or 2-family. If you're proposing an addition on a non-conforming structure, house, and the change complies front, rear, side, height, and coverage, you can go forward with a building permit because you don't implicate any increase in the non-conforming nature of the structure. Those are the words of the statute. 2, if the frontage is deficient, but your proposed alteration complies, front, rear, side, height, coverage, you can go forward with a building permit. And if your proposed addition is in this side yard, but the house is encroaching already in this side yard, and this complies fully front, rear, side, height, and coverage, you can get a building permit and avoid a night at the ZBA. I ask you, if you had to get a finding for that, which of them would be denied? None of them. So this simplifies the process by making these cases, and I don't know how much it will be of the Board of Appeals agenda, but I'll bet it's half. That probably no longer needs a finding and probably can now go by with a special. One caveat, if you're more than doubling this GFA, the gross floor area of the house, then you need to get a special permit anyway, even if you satisfy A, B, or C. And that's because at some point you need a public hearing. The case that made me do that is a Norwell case where the guy was proposing to expand his house and it was going to comply, front, rear, side, height, and coverage, but it would be 5 times bigger. And I said, you probably want a public hearing for that. And so that's kind of where I've drawn the line. It's my line. It's not a legal line. You can change it if you want. I think one town said 50%, and they never had anything that was under 50%. So they changed it to 100 after a few years of experience. And then there are rules in here for tear down as well. I don't know. I come from a town where tear down is very popular. So what are the rules if I tear down a non-conforming structure? And now I want to put something up. Usually the tear downs are very old, dilapidated, very small. But it's on a non-conforming, non-compliant lot. So the rule I have proposed is that if you're tearing it down, but you're building it back in the same footprint with the same GFA, God bless, get a building permit. Nobody's going to do that. If you're going to tear it down and move the footprint or increase the GFA, you have to get a special permit. Now the board can, or a finding, the board can now micromanage the location and the impact on the adjacent homes by holding a special permit hearing and listening to the neighbors and taking the best ideas and go for it. That's pretty much a total rewrite of your existing sections on non-conforming uses and structures.
And we do have a question from online.
I just had a quick, because you're scrolling through this pretty quickly. Can you go back to, I believe it said abandonment of property or not used for several years?
Yes, so there's a provision in the statute, which is section 6 of chapter 48. And it says that non-conforming uses and structures that are abandoned or not used for a period of 2 years lose the protection afforded to non-conformities. The idea that I've added is that if you blow it and more than 2 years goes by, say 5 years go by, but it was a treasured non-conforming use or structure, and you want to bring it back to life, apply for a special permit, and you can bring it back if the board gives you that supermajority vote to do it. I more or less invented this out of experience in the town of Sterling, where the Sterling Inn was a hub of the old village. And for many years, I worked out there for the board. But I would always eat there in advance of the meeting. And it was a wonderful place, a hub of, really a hub of the community. They had a kitchen fire, $20,000 back then, nobody could afford it. The building's still there today. There's a for sale still outside the door. I bet it's been not used now for, somebody came to me about 10 years ago and wanted to open a cooking school. And I think we might have gotten permits to do it, but they never did it. So if it came back, wouldn't it be grand to see that?
Well, I question because if I'm reading this right, so where it says not used for a period of 2 years, if somebody like the ski shack downtown has been closed for years, but is still a viable real estate piece of real estate that they've chose not to do anything with. So I don't, if it was something that was a non-conforming use, then they would lose its protected status. So I would just see if the owner chooses not to do something with it for a period of time, I wouldn't consider it abandoned. I can see in the period where it had a fire and it's sitting boarded up for a period of time. I'm just wondering how that would apply to this. So just a question.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be eligible. Non-use is different than abandonment in that abandonment is subjective. There's only one case in the history of zoning in which a use that was non-conforming was deemed abandoned, and that was many years ago. The case was involved a nursing home that voluntarily turned in its license to the state. That was the end of that. But non-use is more objective. Has it been used? Now we can get into questions about what constitutes use. The usual approach would be services turned on, water, gas, electric, sewer, marketed, still advertised as a use available for somebody to buy and work out of. once you get past those, it becomes increasingly difficult to prove that you continue to use it. Just because you thought you had just having a good idea about it is not using it.
Okay, thank you. I just had a question. That's fine. Thank you.
Anyone else online or in the room on this section? Seeing none, if you'd like to continue on.
Right, it gets easier from here. Section 6 goes from page 16. So I told you the first 19 pages were always the most read. And it actually doesn't end until you get to page. It's around 40. So there's 24 pages here that we have to work. And what I've gathered here in this section 6 are general regulations. So these are things that apply to everybody all the time. Parking, signs, and then there's a new section that we're proposing called performance standards. And this is a departure from your current zoning, which I'll explain when we get there. It's pretty easy to explain parking and loading and signs because we didn't change much at all. This is no change really in terms of the required number of parking spaces for different uses. No change really with regard to things like the table of aisle widths or the driveway regulations that you have. We did make a minor change to common driveways, moved it out of the definitions and put it into the section on parking and loading. Authorized it by here, I think special from the planning board. And then loading spaces, no changes whatsoever. So this stuff has just been renumbered. On signs, I would say that the one change, I don't think it's a major change because it's constitutionally required, is that political signs must not be regulated in the sense that the duration is a factor. Many towns and cities have a sign bylaw or ordinance that says you can put them up 21 days before the election and you have to take them down 10 days after. There's a case from Missouri that went to the US Supreme Court back in the 80s in which a woman protested the first Gulf War. No to the Gulf War was her sign. It was the senior Bush War, not the junior Bush War. And neighbors tore it down. She moved it onto the lawn. Neighbors tore it down again. She moved it into her bedroom window. The neighbors complained and the town told her to shut it down. And she took it to the Supreme Court with the help, I'm sure, of ACLU. And ACLU said, this is the most important aspect of speech we have. So we're not shutting it down. So you can keep that political sign up all year if that's what you want. Not encouraging it, but it is within your constitutional First Amendment rights. And that's about it for the sign changes. And then lastly, performance standards. I'll invite you this evening to take a look at it. It's very substantive change, I think. But I think it's in keeping with some earlier performance standards that you have that I have as a strikeout here. Open display of junk shall be prohibited in all districts. This is what you have today. Worn out, cast off materials which are ready for destruction shouldn't be stored on an open lot. No equipment or process shall be used that will create a nuisance. Well, can we get a little bit more precise about that? Like if you have a light that's shining in your neighbor's window and it doesn't have what today would be called a cutoff luminaire to keep the light from going up into the night sky or sideways, couldn't we define that as being something that you should be doing? Noise, for example, we have a state standard. It's 10 decibels above the ambient measured at the nearest occupied property line. That's basically a doubling of the source noise. So why can't we put that in the zoning bylaw and make it a local standard as well? If you put it in a local bylaw, it can be enforced locally. If you're just relying on the state law, you're waiting for the DEP to come. There's a big difference between these. And then there's also some performance standards in here on how to prepare a site and maintain a site during the construction process. So things like stripping the land, clearing for utility trenching, preserving existing vegetation, limits of clearing. I'm sure we've all got horror stories about somebody who wanted to market a piece of land and they stripped every blade of grass off of it in the process, and then it leached sediment out onto the roadway. This would prevent stuff like that from happening. There's some standards for traffic, having to do with who provides a study, how detailed the study is, what are their responsibilities with regard to things like sight distance, with regard to level of service decreases. Level of service is the measurement of waiting time, delay at a signalized or unsignalized intersection. If your project is going to cause the letter grade, it's like going to college. If your letter grade is going to go from a B to an A, from a B to an E, that's a lot of delay. We might want to talk about how to mitigate that. This raises the question for you to ask. I think you're really going to have to look at this in some detail in order to get an appreciation for how comprehensive it is. It only applies to commercial and non-residential uses and multifamily construction with more than 6 dwelling units. Everybody else is not affected. And many towns have adopted these types of regulations to try to make the commercial development in town responsible for more than just, having two driveways coming into a business or not sharing access with another business. These are things that you see long ago, and there's better ways to do it today. These standards are designed to push you in that direction. I think that gets us through section 6, Dan.
Any questions in the room or online? In the room.
Yes, sorry. I would like to just talk to you guys at some point. I know Samantha Elliott is our new town planner that started, senior planner, or whatever. We've been looking at our sign bylaw, which I know the sign bylaw here. We've been looking at our sign bylaw and sign overlay district bylaw.
Yes, I looked at both, yeah.
You did, okay.
My initial thought was that I would be able to merge them into one approach.
Yeah,
But the sign overlay district, which applies only to a very small
Commercial,
slice
yeah.
of downtown, is so utterly comprehensive and so different in the way that it defines pretty much the same sign often.
Yeah.
So there's a list of signs in the section 6.2 and a much larger list of signs in section sign overlay district, which is 9.5, I think.
okay, yeah,
And when I went to merge them, I was like, which one do I choose?
yeah, it's, yeah. We've tried and looked and yeah, it's
You have one choice, which is bad, followed by another choice, which is bad. One choice would be to eliminate section 6.2 and make the whole town follow the sign overlay.
Yeah.
Then you'd have really good signs, but probably a really angry constituency.
Yeah.
The other choice is to take the sign section 6.2 and lower the standards in the sign overlay district. Or make it a general bylaw. You can regulate signs with a general bylaw. You don't need to put it in the zoning. And when you regulate it in the general bylaw, you can not only regulate new signs, you can regulate old signs. So like in Concord, for example, when I was on my planning board, they volunteered me for the sign committee. One of the selectmen ran it, and I, dutifully showed up, and we went through the process of drafting a general bylaw for signs. And the idea was we got some stinkers and we wanted to get rid of them.
I know there's a lot of history with the sign overlay district and so, yeah, we've sat down and started looking at that ourselves, but I see it's in progress. So maybe we can have a follow-up conversation about what that.
I'm open to the idea of merging them again, but I just.
Yeah, I don't know if that's,
hands up.
yeah, I don't know if that would be possible. It'd be hard, but okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Other questions in the room? We do have a question online. Mr. McCullough.
Yes, and I'm going off topic a little bit. Just a quick question on the sign bylaw. I looked on the sign bylaw committee webpage. It doesn't look like they've actually met since 2022. So who actually enforces the town sign bylaws?
Building inspector.
I'm sorry.
The answer is building inspector.
That would be that would be my guess, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's a zoning issue, so
Yeah.
it would fall under the building inspector.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is why, I would say probably as many as 20% of cities and towns have taken it out of the zoning and put it into a general bylaw. And now you can name your own sign enforcement officer. Got enough to do. The committee is outside the zoning act, so it doesn't have as rigorous set of procedures. And even more importantly, a general bylaw can be amended with a 50% plus one vote, whereas zoning takes a 2/3 vote.
If there are thoughts on converting it from a zoning bylaw for the signage to general bylaw, this is also an opportunity to contribute to that. That type of change is certainly within the purview of this committee. That of recommendation.
Just as a way to get you started, if you're interested in the topic, Google Concord sign bylaw. It's general bylaw, and you'll see, you can kind of compare. I'm not saying it's, it's the best thing since sliced bread, but it's an example that you can look at pretty easily.
Yeah, I was just curious on it because it doesn't really seem to be being enforced anywhere. And I definitely don't want to carve out another position in town, but I was just curious who it went by as far as approval. So thank you.
Aaron, with the new person,
Mhm.
I think it would be great to meet with this committee, because the overlay and the bylaw,
Mhm.
it's ridiculous,
Yeah,
completely ridiculous. And I was part of listening.
yeah, you know more of the history than I.
The overlay district is the overlay district that ain't the bylaw.
Right, and there's a lot of political reasons behind how that got created, and some really good thoughts of making our signs look better than they did, without a doubt. But I think having something consistent that's actually
agree.
readable and putting into practice would be great.
And I think that would make, talking about the enforcement part too, would
It would make
make
the enforcement part much easier.
much
as well.
easier.
Yes, so that would be great to meet at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Other feedback on this in the room or online? Seeing none,
Well, here's some good news. I had to fix your adult use bylaw. All you had on adult uses in your current bylaw was a reference, I believe, in the use table that said it's, there's definitions, but otherwise there aren't any regulations except for some other really small spacing requirements that you added to the use table. Like a body art establishment, this is a First Amendment constitutional issue. So the path to regulating adult entertainment is well worn, and it's very simple. You can't regulate the speech directly. That's not allowed under the First Amendment, except in the most extreme cases, like shouting fire in a movie theater. That's it. So the alternative is to regulate what are called the secondary effects of the adult business. And those are generally crimes to property, crimes to person. Once you get into that type of regulation, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions can be put in place, like the spacing requirements that you have in the existing use table. So I've added the secondary effects clause, not for or against adult entertainment, but I am for it being constitutional if you're going to have it. So that's the only change. I can't wait to explain that to town meetings, and we'll go from there. So don't get alarmed when you see that. Other than that, I've kept your registered RMD provision for medical marijuana. I had a provision in here for adult marijuana, but I pulled it out after your last town meeting. And those are the only two things that occupy section 7, which is special regulations. No, I'm sorry, there's one other thing, which is trailers and mobile homes, and I just renumbered it and put it in this section because it's special.
any feedback on section 7? Seeing none in the room, seeing none online at the moment.
Section 8 is special residential regulations, and I make a separate category here because special regulations in many towns is things like earth removal or trying to think of some other examples, quarrying. You want to have rules about senior living facilities mixed in with that kind of thing. So special rules now that apply to residential topics. The first one is your accessory apartment bylaw. Couple of minor changes, but it's largely just renumbered and placed here. Second would be the art craft studio, no changes, just renumbered. Third, you have a couple of allowances for conversions to apartments. One is a single family to a 2-unit. The other is a single to a 2, 3, or 4 unit. I didn't change anything. They are special rules that apply to residential premises, so I moved them to this section. They were in the use table before. I basically just moved them over. A major change would be the senior housing facility bylaw. This is modeled on Andovers. And it's a pretty straightforward special permit approach. The district controls the lot size and the dimensional setbacks and things of that sort. The types of senior housing facility are set forth in the definition. At the low end of the scale, independent. Independent means a communal facility in that they serve in a dining hall, and they might have some amenities and accessory uses that are available to all the occupants. There's not really any care going on unless you pay for it and bring it in yourself. The next level up would be assisted living. Assisted living is services provided to people who are defective in 2 or 3 activities of daily life: bathing, cooking, dressing. If you're deficient in 2 or 3 of those 5 activities, you're officially eligible to live in this. You're an eligible occupant in an assisted living facility. The average age of an assisted living facility resident and gender is an 82-year-old woman. That's a study done by the GFA years ago. But it's a whole different level of treatment. And then as you move up the ladder, you would go to a memory unit, which is addressing people with dementia or other memory-related issues. And finally, at the end of that would be a long-term care facility, formerly known as a nursing home or a convalescent home, now called a long-term care facility under state regulations. And in a place like Carlton Willard in Bedford, a good example, there's all of these things. There's little cottages for people who are independently based, there's assisted living memory units, and there's long-term care facility. There's another one, if you know the Route 2 turn at the old Mobil station, all of that's exposed now. It used to be behind trees before. That huge yellow facility up on the hill there is another example of a congregate care facility. And these are basically good tax-paying businesses who don't generally demand many services. Ambulance calls being one thing that probably do go a little up, but generally speaking, they're not, certainly they're no school kids, and they are good contributors to the tax base. And we're not getting any younger. I've just watched this play out over the past 20 years, my folks. Hard to believe that Marathon bombing weekend, we moved them out of their house in Venice, Florida. That was 10, 11 years ago. And they went through every stage of what I've just described. You always make the move a little bit too late. That's my word. You should have gotten out of there a year or 2 before that. And we all need it. So time to face the music. I think the highest number of people turned 65 in the baby boom this year. This is the apex of people turning 65 in that baby boom from the end of World War II to 1960. So this is all by special permit, and special permit granting authority would be the planning board. Oops, I've got it as the zoning board of appeals, but it's subject to negotiation. I've also carried over your multifamily dwelling and mixed-use development bylaw and your open space development bylaw, which is just renumbered and put into this section since it pertains to residential issues. Housing affordability. For once, I didn't have to take a really sharp pencil to an affordability inclusionary bylaw. You did not cross lines. What you have will work under state law. I don't know how it's working out, but it's legal. That's the good news. Many towns try to control affordability in new subdivisions of more than X units. You can't put a subdivision on a special permit. That's the only way you can get the affordable units. So you're basically in on the right side of things there. That's section 8. Dan.
Any questions, feedback in the room? Or online? We do have online. Mr. McGrail.
Mark, you might have done it in parking, but I think we talked about with the senior housing that we're gonna have to do something for parking calculations on that.
Yeah, let me make a note. I will grab that. Usually it's the size of the staff at its largest shift plus X spaces per room.
Yep.
And everybody should remember that at some point it's your duty, I'm looking at a lot of young people sitting here, to take away the keys from your parents.
Yeah. I don't know what the calculation would be, but I think as a town, we have to do something.
I did it with my mother by taking her to Dave and Buster's while she was once again giving me the business. And I sat her in one of those driving things and I put 2 quarters in and then I watched her hit everything while I videoed it. And whenever she would complain about not having a car, I would just play it.
My mother was never in an accident that was her fault.
Yeah, I'll add that. Thank you for reminding.
No problem.
Yeah, it looks like it's the assisted living facility, it's 1 parking space per every 2 units, plus 1 parking space per 2 employees and the
Yeah,
maximum
I
parking.
think it's in the parking schedule, isn't it? Or is it in the section on senior?
It's right, it's built into the assisted living bylaw, Mark. It's kind of hidden in there, so it's not in the parking table of the current bylaw.
Okay.
You can dig it out of there and however you want to make that work.
All right, I will put it into the parking table in section 6.1.4.
That makes sense. Yep.
Other feedback we've got in the room.
The parking for seniors at the senior housing is, they use it mostly as a private smoking room because they can't smoke in the building.
It's true.
I don't know if you need restrictions like or demanding that the car be moved sometimes. But I'm being silly.
And we have feedback. Mr. Noel.
Yeah, the building height for senior living is capped at 35 feet, but that could be changed through special permit.
Sure. Would you like me to make a note to that effect?
I think you did it. You've already made that change, Mark. Scroll back up. So I missed it.
Okay.
Where did I miss it?
Because we mentioned that at the last meeting. I think Mark already fixed that.
Okay.
I think it's under, because I made a note. I'll tell you right where it is. It's in section 8.44, Mark.
Okay.
0.442. I think you already made the change.
Great.
Yeah. Not exceed the height limitation, the applicable district. You just went by it. Used to be 35 feet, Theo, but Mark fixed that. Go down a little bit, Mark, to 2, right there. Building height.
Yeah, I see it. I got it here.
Mark already fixed that, Theo.
Oh, great, thank you.
He changed it to say the applicable district instead of 35 feet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And sometimes this is reuse of buildings, and I think that ought not to be discouraged. I'm hoping to get involved in one that is near the hospital in the town, and the hospital is 110 feet high. So what's the problem? Why not have a 6-story or 7-story building? It's not like the traffic is going to get worse. And if it fits, because I could see a skyscraper in the middle of a 35-foot tops residential neighborhood, but if it's next to the hospital, and the hospital's already 110 feet, who's offended by that? So.
Other feedback in the room, we do have more online as well. Okay, Mr. Waterman.
Hi, and I might be asking this in the wrong place, so apologies if I am. Wondering for in-law apartments that have been added on to a home, is it still the ordinance that you have to have a shared kitchen?
It's section 8.1. I'm coming to it. If you have a second, you can have a second kitchen,
You can, okay,
but you have to remove it within 90 days of the surviving, you have to remove it after the death of the relative who was in the ADU.
got it. Okay, thank you very much.
I should point out that the governor, Baker, a couple of years ago, had amendments to ADUs in his housing bill. And it's a little different than yours in that it's not based on family occupation of the ADU. You can also have the ADU in a detached structure on the property, like over a garage or a carriage house. If you have it in the principal residence, it can't exceed, I believe it's 900 square feet or 50% of the principal unit, whichever is smaller. And there is the possibility of doing it in the principal unit by special, by as of right status. And to amend the town bylaw to do that, it would only require a 50% vote plus one. So there's all kinds of opportunities there, but you have to do it in accordance with the governor's definitions.
In the bond bill or the housing, affordable housing right now to, for ADUs to be by right, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And does it say families for that or no, that's just
No,
anyone, yeah.
no. So the thinking is that, you know, Mrs. Jones, who needs the occupant in order to have the retirement work out while staying in place, is eligible to take anybody who can afford the unit.
Yeah.
Or even in some places, she can move into the unit. That's not her. Who needs more than 800 square feet as a single. And then she can get more rent for the house.
By right.
Any other feedback on this section or related to this topic? And if you wanted to define ADU for the audience,
Accessory dwelling unit instead of apartment.
good questions. Much appreciated.
The next section is a gathering of all of your overlay districts and special regulations in one place, most of which are not changed. The floodplain is 9.1. I did take what was provided to me as the most modern version that town meeting has enacted, and that's now been substituted for what was online. There is an old district called the Municipal Building Reuse Overlay District, short and sweet. I didn't change anything, I just moved it here. There is another district called the Signage Overlay District. Actually, I've skipped one. The second one should have been the municipal district as opposed to the municipal building reuse. The municipal district is relatively short. It really just involves warrant articles to convey land out of the district. But it's in the book, seems to have some usefulness, and it's pretty short and sweet. I didn't change it. The third is the municipal building reuse overlay district, which is again just renumbered. The fourth is the signage overlay district. We've talked about that already tonight. Let me see if I can go 25 pages down the road and get beyond that. The fifth is the mixed use overlay district. Again, an existing overlay that I did not change. The sixth, it turns out that your wireless bylaw is an overlay district. So that's also section 9.6, didn't change it. 9.7 is the creative development overlay district that I was seeing the praises of before. And 9.8 will be the new self-storage overlay district after the AG sends a letter saying it's okay to go. Nothing, if anything, changed in those bylaws, and they're just grouped together now. And they don't get in the table because you're gonna get all kinds of conflicting directions. What might be allowed in the B district would not be allowed in the floodplain district, so you can't have two entries in the box. You just refer people to the overlay districts by putting them in a section 9 like we have here. The final section is the administration and enforcement procedures, and everybody's procedural blueprint here for how the bylaw is designed to operate. So the first couple of these would be enforcement by the building inspector, the duties of the inspector, the records kept by the inspector. I haven't changed any of that. Building permits and certificates of occupancy, when are these permits required? Again, these fall into the bailiwick of the building commissioner, and I didn't change much, if any. Violations and penalties is 10.3. The building inspector sends a notice of violation out with a cease and desist. If you don't like it, you have the right to go to the Board of Appeals. If a neighbor requested enforcement from the building commissioner and the building commissioner denied enforcement, that neighbor has the right to take the building commissioner to the Board of Appeals. And the Board of Appeals has 30 days. You have 30 days to appeal to the Board of Appeals. And the board has the public hearing obligation and then a written decision, which is appealable to the Land Court or Superior Court after that. That's all in section 10.3. Here's the conversation I've been waiting to have for quite a while. I added something called non-criminal disposition to enforcement. The statute currently says that you can get a $300 fine for a zoning violation, each day constituting a separate offense. But that's misleading. In order to get that money, you have to take the building commissioner with town council, would have to take the scofflaw to district court for a show cause hearing in front of a magistrate. And if the magistrate found likelihood that there's a violation, he would send it over for a jury of 6, and then there would be a trial. And only if the trial results in a finding of guilty would there be a fine. You don't have the power at the Board of Appeals to fine anybody because you're not a judge. An alternative to all of that, which is very difficult and costly, is to just simply issue parking tickets through the building commissioner. $50 for the first offense, nothing for the first offense, 50 for the second, 100 for the third. You can go up to 300, 200 for the fourth. And then at that point in time, if they're still disobeying the law, maybe you ought to call town council and go see the magistrate. But this is a simpler way to handle it. You have to accept the provisions of Chapter 21D in order to do that. But that's just a warrant article at town meeting. And I was in a small town yesterday. Building commissioner's just taken over the job maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He said, yeah, I saw that pad. It's never been used, but at least he has the option. Right? So I like the non-criminal disposition approach. I think there's really no appeal either. That's one of the attractive things to it. I suppose they could go to the district court judge and try to get it overturned. I've never seen that happen. 10.4 is the Board of Appeals. So when I look at the existing zoning, the thing I'm looking for here primarily that's missing is a clear statement of intent on whether or not the Board of Appeals may or may not issue use variances. 1976 amendment to the enabling legislation said that you can only issue a use variance where the bylaw expressly allows it. It doesn't substitute the test. You still have to show soil condition, shape, topography, hardship, no detriment, no derogation. But a use variance is such a special animal that the legislature, again, spurred on by that finding from the study in Cambridge, said we can minimize use variances. If the bylaw doesn't allow it, you can't do it. So the question for you is, I cannot read and decipher the current provision. It doesn't specifically allow it, so I'd be inclined to say that it prohibits it, but it doesn't specifically prohibit it either. My rule of thumb is that the bigger the town, the more you ought to think about being able to give a use variance. I don't see towns abusing this like the Harvard study of Cambridge practices. It is a way to circumvent the need to go to town meeting in a case where you want somebody to be able to start a business relatively quickly. And if the neighbors aren't complaining, this was designed to protect them more than anything else. The reason you can't do it unless it's allowed is so that a neighbor has a simple, easy appeal. Judge, it doesn't say they can do it in the book, done. But if there's no argument about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, it's something you want to think about. The bigger the city, my partner Jonathan is the land use lawyer for Everett. He's the casino lawyer. So he inherited the job of sitting with the Board of Appeals. He had a family birthday party for one of his kids. He said, "Can you go to Everett tonight?" I said, "Sure." I'd never been to Everett before. I sat through 6 or 7 variance hearings. At the end of it, they said, you know, everybody was going on. They said, "What'd you think?" I said, "It was refreshing." I think they gave all the variances out, and 2 or 3 of them were useful. So it's a political decision as well as a legal decision.
So with that, where there's a clear question, if there is feedback, if there's input, definitely being solicited, if people have opinions, one way or the other. What my understanding is that it has not been used in the town that is known, certainly not recently, but it becomes a tool that, if we allow, could potentially be used, but is not required. Otherwise, it would require, again, a modification to zoning bylaws in the future, which could also be done. So it's a matter of, do we do this as a structural change to allow for use variances where they're not currently permitted? So if people have feedback on that, certainly in the room or online, we're certainly interested in receiving that. In the room,
I'm not done with 10, so let me go on from here.
we do have some feedback.
Okay, all
online.
right.
Mr. McGrail.
Sorry about that. I think it should be considered by the town. I think it is a tool, as Mark said. And a lot of times, and Mark, we're famous for having split zoning lots. And, you know, in the front half of it will be the business district.
Yeah.
Half of, at the back of it might be like a general residence district that really doesn't have any general residence use.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a perfect example where it could be used. Because, you know, we've had examples of having to go rezone lots at town meeting, which is expensive and time consuming. They've all passed. But that could avoid this because you could just get a use variance for the general residence portion of the lot and go forward with the project if it was approved.
I think for the Board of Appeals, it presents a dilemma in that, you know, they know it's not a situation involving soil conditions, shape, or topography. But if there are 15 angry people saying, say no, they know they're going to get sued, or at least there's some likelihood. And they probably shouldn't do it in that circumstance. Whereas if it's a, you know, kumbaya meeting and everybody wants it, obviously there's a risk still associated with that.
And that's what happens usually. I mean, if it was a use variance and neighbors showed up and didn't want it, I mean, you know, there's Board of Appeals members here on this committee. They're not going to give the variance. So, but you're right. A lot of times in situations where neighbors are, you know, they want to get rid of the use that's there. And everybody's, you know, looking for the avenue to do it. And this would make it a lot less expensive and time consuming to do it this way.
And that relates back to my statement about non-conforming uses, where you can replace one really bad one with another one that's not allowed, but it's less detrimental without a variance.
Yeah, and that's a great provision too. So.
And then, all right, so the change in use isn't permitted by the ZBA, but they could still try to go to town meeting, right? I mean, that would be like the next level of appeal, and that would be okay.
And I had a client, he has an office building, the Digital Credit Union in Maynard, outside the new shopping center. It's not a part of the shopping center, he's in an industrial district. Shopping center is filling up with medical offices, they're not allowed in the industrial district. So we went to town meeting and we said, can we put an entry in the industrial district that says medical offices SP? And they said, well, that's not planning. And I said, well, where have you been for 150 years? The mall's just finished. Let my guy go forward. You can control it with a special permit. Almost a unanimous vote at town meeting, done. So but that's not the usual case, because there are other industrial districts, not just the one next to the mall. And now they all say medical office SP.
And for those who may follow this meeting afterwards, you're still welcome to contact the committee. We're still interested in feedback. This is obviously an issue that is open and will come up at town meeting. So again, getting opinions in advance of that is much appreciated. And with that, I'm not seeing any additional feedback at the meeting at this time.
So just to finish the procedural section here, planning board gets its own set of regulations now, or empowerments. Board of Appeals has one, planning board should have one too. They're just mirror provisions that bring planning board into the mix. Planning board's responsibilities are to hear applications for special permits when designated and to decide applications for site plan approval. More about that in a minute. So special permits has been rewritten. I've added criteria that I think are a little bit more clear and usable. I've used these same criteria every time. I was the Dedham Planning Board's lawyer when Legacy Place was permitted, and they worked just fine for Legacy Place. I can't imagine a place where they wouldn't work just fine. They're broad rather than narrow, but it is the broadness of them that allows you to explore places in nooks and crannies. What's, for example, environmental? Well, it's stormwater, it's lights, it's noise, it's lots of other things that fit into that ambient kind of existence. And then I've suggested in the site plan review section that I'm trying to remember whether you had site plan review special permit. You don't need to look it up, but the site plan review section is one that is unregulated by state law. There's only one reference to site plan review, and that's a bond provision, and that was added in the governor's housing bill 2 years ago. This is the invention of local government and the court. Site plan review is generally regulation of a use, not prohibition. So the powers are yes or yes with conditions. Special permit is yes, yes with conditions, or no. So they're different. Site plan review, you can't say no. If you think it's so bad that it should be able to say no, put it on special permit, not site plan review. Many uses are on both. In that case, one is subsumed by the other. Special permit's a larger procedure. It swallows the site plan review. So the idea here is what happens when somebody is disgruntled about the result? Could be the applicant, it could be the neighbor. The court has said that the appeal mechanism is for the appeal to be filed when the application for the building permit is issued or denied. So suppose you want a widget factory and you go to site plan approval and they say yes, but subject to 52 conditions, 26 of which you hate. You have to generate a building permit application you know you can't get with 26 violations so that the building inspector can say no, and then it can go to the Board of Appeals, which then reviews the planning board decision too. None of that works. None of that works. For one thing, the Board of Appeals shouldn't be reviewing the planning board decision. They're not one over the other. They're equal. And the planning board has the experience with site plan review because they do it every time. You get the odd one that goes to the ZBA, let the planning board control the process. So what I've put for 20 years, and it works, is go directly to court. Take it to court like you would a special permit. Go to land court, go to Superior. Now, in order to do that, the land court added a wrinkle last year, 2 years ago. Judge Foster ruled that in order to do that, you ought, he didn't say you must, but he did say you ought, and I agree, to hold a public hearing here in Town Hall first. And there's a written decision. And now when he gets it in the court, he's got something to sink his teeth in. And that's the only real onerous thing that we've added here. We borrowed the procedures from special permits. meaning that you have to notify the neighbors 2 weeks in advance, the 90-day decision-making period, which you don't really need all of. But the key thing here is this is yes or yes with conditions on a simple majority vote versus yes, yes with conditions or no on a super majority vote, 4 out of 5. And it's a good tool. Many things require site plan review but don't require a special permit. Many things require special permits and site plan review. It's all being done here pretty much by the same, it is being done by the same board. So there's no, you don't get into a situation where the bad stuff happens. ZBA is special permit granting authority, planning board is site plan. They say turn left, they want right. How do you reconcile those two things? You don't have that problem. We're good to go. I've also added a couple of new provisions at the end. One is Dover Amendment Site Plan Review. If you have an application for lights at the football field on artificial turf, that's educational use. If you don't have this, the person who gets to make the first call on that is the building commissioner. That's not fair. It's not fair to anybody, especially the building commissioner. If he says yes, he's got 1,000 people who don't want the lights in the artificial turf. If he says no, he's got 1,000 people who feel the opposite. So let's put it in front of a committee, planning board, and now make it site plan review 3-2 and let the thing unfold in a more judicial arena than people yelling at the building commissioner. Remember that even if the building commissioner says no, the applicant has to get 4 votes at the ZBA to overturn that on a 5-member board, all 3 on a 3-member board. Again, not fair. Have it site plan review. And the final thing is reasonable accommodations. This focuses on those things that you were referring to earlier, typically rehab facilities for recovering drug and alcohol addicts, not people who are addicted, but recovering. Or major federal laws, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, the Federal Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988, the Old Rehabilitation Act, and there's one other one at the federal level, along with state regulations, including Section 3 of the Zoning Act, say no disabled person can be discriminated against. So we're in Wakefield. I represented Wenham 7-8 years ago. They had a big mansion with 16 bedrooms in it. They designated it as a detox facility for recovering drug and alcohol addicts. Guy looked over the fence one day and saw it. Building inspector said, okay. He looked over the fence, saw what was going on, went to town, complained to the selectman called a public meeting. At the public meeting, the selectman said ABC. Next thing you know, we're in federal court. And that's the last thing you want to happen. So let's put a little bit of control on it. Let's get it to a committee. Here it's the ZBA, could be the planning board, you decide. And let's keep the temperature down, because you make one mistake here, you're in federal district court. It's a civil rights violation to discriminate against people protected by these disability laws. And there's money involved too. So it's not just a slap, it's money too. So important to have that in the book. Want to talk about those things for a second? All that's left is definitions.
Any questions on any of the special provisions that we've been discussing? Any in the room? Mr. McGrail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things on the Dover Amendment site plan approval. That's a great change. Mark, because the way I just permitted the high school for the town, and we had to do it the exact way you said. We had to go to the building inspector, get what was called a friendly denial, and then appeal him to the zoning board of appeals, which is just administratively a real pain in the neck.
Yep. Now, had you done it in Winchester, Counselor, I had this in place when they redid their high school 5 years ago.
Yeah, so, so that's a great change. And I just want to point out some technical things on the special permit site plan approval. So we currently do, Mark, have site plan review in conjunction with special permit. So, and then we have site plan approval separately if you don't need a special permit. So I think the draft is going to need a little bit of tweaking, because if you go to 10.7.2,
Yeah,
it talks about applicability. So so basically, if you look at number one, any new development or expansion or change of use other than a single unit or two residence unit in those districts will be which would, oh, scratch that, 10.71 up one, the purpose, there it is. So the purpose is to ensure, oh, right there. Yeah, and so what it says, purpose of site plan to ensure design layout developments located in districts which do not require a special permit. So
I see.
basically, so the way we work now is if you need a special permit, then you don't need site plan approval because it's done in conjunction with the special permit.
Yeah, I borrowed this section 10.7.1 from the section of the old bylaw that referred to things that don't need a special
And
permit.
that's the way we practice. So the fact, if I go to the zoning board of appeals and I need a special permit, they do the site plan approval. If I have a project in one of those districts that doesn't need a special permit, then I have to go to the planning board for site plan approval. And that's,
Yeah,
so I think but if you go down to 10.7.2,
yeah.
conflicts with 10.7.1.
So in my town, and I'm not saying I like it, because I was on the planning board and I didn't like it. If it didn't require a special permit, it went to the planning board and the planning board made a site plan decision. And they didn't have the appeal provision that I recommended at the time, but the planning board had the final word. If it had a special permit requirement, it went to the planning board for a site plan review, but it was a recommendation only to the ZBA.
Yeah, we don't have that now, and you know, I would suggest that's going to be burdensome.
Well, I
I
would
mean-
think that with the planning board serving both roles, we can easily just say that some of this gets site plan review, some of it gets special permit. I can't imagine that if it requires a special permit, it's not also going to get site plan review. And in those cases, they sort of merge into one thing.
Well, like I said, what happens now is the special permit granting authority does the site plan approval at the same time, whoever that special permit granting authority is. Which in most of the cases now is the zoning board of appeals.
Well, how does that work out?
It works out, I think Joe will tell you, he's on the board. I think it works out very well. I mean, it's certainly, you know, my experience in other towns that require special permit at the zoning board and site plan approval at the same time at the planning board is a nightmare because you're like playing ping pong back and forth between the boards.
I agree.
You can end up with a double appeal with different boards. So I think the way Wakefield has it streamlined is efficient. And I would suggest it would stay that way. And again, if you don't need a special permit, you have to go to the planning board. It's not like anything is by right. The planning board for site plan approval.
TBD, counselor.
I'm sorry?
TBD, to be determined.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it to the table because that's historically how things have been done here.
Yep. I have the same situation unfolding in Wareham. I have a site plan review requirement and a special permit, and it's at the ZBA, so the ZBA does a site plan.
So our bylaw currently states all proposals which are located in an area of town zone, neighborhood business, limited business, or limited industrial, all the heavy districts, in which do not require a special permit from a special permit granting authority must be approved by the planning board through site plan review prior to the issuance of a building permit. But if you need a special permit, you do the site plan at the same time. You're not going to the planning board and doing a double board.
I get it. We'll talk.
Okay. That was that. And then you have a provision here in site plan approval, which I think is great on the performance guarantee.
Okay.
I think we can incorporate that into special permit too, because that's always an issue at the zoning board, Mark, that, you know, there might not be landscaping done in the winter time, but we don't have a provision that they can get a performance guarantee. So the board always struggles with that.
What is the citation in the site plan section?
10.7.8.
Thank you, Dan.
10.7.8.
Okay, I'll move that over as a note into the special permit.
Yes, I think, Joe, you're here, right? You know how you guys struggle with that sometimes on how to kind of take that surety?
Yeah, but don't we just wait? We give you the,
Yeah, and Tom Mullen, our town council, Mark, unless we have, you know, he always says, since our bylaw doesn't have that language, he's not comfortable taking a performance guarantee.
I understand. Okay.
we still give you the occupancy permit, right? And then we just, is that how we,
Yeah, you do. You guys work with it, but it's always just, I think it would be better for the town to be able to get a performance guarantee. So if somebody doesn't do something, you can enforce it and have money put aside.
I got it.
It's the enforcement issue.
That is all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room, chapter 10 or online? Seeing no additional comments.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Great help. Thank you.
And that brings us over to definitions.
In the coded version, you'll see that roughly a third of them are yellow, which means new, and that they tend to focus mostly on uses like restaurant, warehouse, wholesale. You had plenty of definitions for things that were more oriented towards state building code issues, cellar, basement, things like that.
Otherwise, the same drawings and so forth will carry it forward.
I'm supposed to get rid of one that's really bad.
Any questions, comments on definitions? Or if there's anyone who is curious about a particular definition, there are some categories of definitions that are in here as well, such as senior housing facility has the definitions affiliated with it that are segregated out.
Now, where I can, I took the definitions out of the text and put them in the back, so it's like a glossary. If you want to get a definition, they take the last 10 pages, you're in the definitions.
And with that, we have come to the end of the actual document itself.
And right on time for the start of the first presidential
I
debate.
know.
Look at that, huh? Right there.
Hasn't quite started.
So there are two other things, if you just want to mention it, the cannabis moratorium. It has been removed since that had expired, and then solar energy is going to be added.
Well,
Maybe.
it's up to you. I mean, to tell you the truth, Mr. Chairman, I can only tell you what I know would pass muster. But I can't tell you how close you should come to the line with any degree of confidence. If you put it all on site plan approval, I think Judge Spicer has already said he would approve it. But if you say we can't have it in the big R district, or in the big R district by special permit only, that the case law hasn't gone that far yet, so. We got plenty of time.
Okay. Excellent. With that, any other feedback, input from anyone in the room on any of the topics that have been discussed or other related items to it?
So is this the draft that's going to, are we gonna redo this draft again, or is this like, is this the?
I'm happy that we're at this point because I think most of what happens at this point is tweaks.
Well, I know you mentioned it was gonna go to like 8 or 9 drafts, if we're only at, what are we at now, 2, 3?
We got plenty of time.
No, I don't think we have to shoot for 9.
Yeah, I know.
April and Bridgewater were both 18.
Anyone online who'd like to contribute anything additional at this point?
I
Dan.
actually, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, sorry, Dan, I noticed you're recording. You're gonna have this posted online somewhere so we can just review again?
This entire meeting, as with all meetings by Zoom, will be posted actually to the committee's website,
Okay.
which is available at www.wakefield.ma.us. under boards and committees, bylaw review committee. You'll see it posted once it's been processed by the town administrator's office. That usually is done within a few days.
Okay.
And it'll be posted there.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other feedback? Mr. Knoll?
Yeah, this is the first of many sort of, just sort of free-form public opportunities, for review and comment, and then there will be more formal public hearings closer to town meeting. Is that, that maybe that's to be determined, right?
The process that this continues with is that the bylaw review committee will continue to work with Attorney Bobrowski to tweak and adjust the recodified recommended zoning bylaw. It will then present it to the town council, the warrant article, which will then be referred over to the planning board for recommendation at town meeting. So the planning board will have to hold a public hearing on that aspect. We will continue to have additional input sessions and additional ways for members of the public and other interested individuals to provide feedback directly to the bylaw review committee so that we can take that feedback and incorporate it as early as possible when people have it. So as a committee, we're very receptive to feedback and input questions, and we do our best to try and get timely answers to those. And opinions of this allow for recodification. And as we've discussed tonight, minor tweaks that ultimately will become structural enhancements and improvements to the zoning bylaw recommendation that will be presented ideally next spring at town meeting. So thanks for the question. Hopefully that explains the process itself that we intend to go through. It will go before the planning board. That is actually a statutory requirement.
Yeah, that's helpful. I appreciate it.
Any other feedback, input, thoughts? With that, as a board, we do have all 8 members available to us. We do have one vote that we will need to take this evening. This is a very important vote, and that will be a vote to adjourn. So for the members who are online, if you have the ability to indicate that, you can do your vote by taking yourself off mute. So that'll be Lucy, you can take yourself off mute to take that once we take the vote itself. We will do this by roll call, just as we actually do have. Actually, we have to do roll call for the people who are remote, and we can do it by majority vote for the people who are present in person. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
That has been made by Ann. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Catherine. So we've got a motion to adjourn made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. So all in favor, first I'm going to take the online votes if they wish to contribute. Lucy?
Yes.
This is in affirmative. For those who are in person, you can indicate affirmative with raising of your hand to adjourn. It is unanimous. The meeting is adjourned at 9:07. Thank you everyone for your participation. Continue to provide input. Much appreciated. Thank you to the town and public safety, the police and fire for allowing us to use this space and try out the tech for a hybrid type of meeting. For those who are watching online, I hope that this has provided a valuable feedback as we are working to try and provide some additional information. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.